This is Continuum Drag, a weekly podcast revisiting television sci-fi, fantasy, and everything in between. This week, Kolchak the Night Stalker, episodes 11 and 12.
Roosevelt Heights used to be a plush neighborhood, but the plush neighbors moved uptown, leaving the old people. And old people don't move easily. They become set in their surroundings. Their friends live next door. They've been going to the same store for 25 years. And probably most important of all, they can't afford to relocate, even if they wanted to. The battle of fixed income versus galloping inflation never ends. But even inflation took a backseat here in Roosevelt Heights, as a far greater fear overtook the residents, a terror which effectively dwarfed everything else.
Welcome to Continuum Drag, the podcast addicted to hot Texas chili. I'm Luke, here with my co-host Jordan. What's real, Jordan?
I've seen more dead bodies than you've had TV dinners.
That's a lot of dead bodies, my friend.
It is a lot of TV.
That's what you eat most nights, right?
No. But when he said that, I was like, is that accurate? I know it's a good line, but that's a lot of dead bodies.
I will say, though, in my personal life, you'd only have to see, like, 2 dead bodies to eat more TV dinners than I have.
You're probably right. I've probably, like, the actual classic, like, TV dinner with, like, the little compartments, like a little frozen meat and thing. I've probably had it maybe once.
Right. You usually microwave other things for your dinner.
That's right.
Pizza pocket, hot pocket.
I haven't had a pizza pocket in years.
Anything that comes in pocket form.
I had a friend who used to love those. Remember they used to have those gross advertisements where they were always popping all over the screen?
I'm not specifically, but it makes sense. Well, Jordan, we're back for more Kolchak.
Yeah, doesn't it feel a little bit like, at least this is how I felt when I was watching these yesterday. It feels like we finished the show and then we found a bunch of bonus episodes. I know that's not what the case is. We just left and we came
episodes.
Back. That's what it feels like. It's like, you know, it's like, oh, there's a show I like. I wish they'd made more episodes. And like, they did. They did make more episodes.
Good news.
Good news. But it's just that we only watched half the season.
I'm glad you're excited to be back because we're gonna do the final stretch of them. It's like returning to an old friend.
Yeah, and these episodes, I'll just say at the bat, show all the strengths Kolchak has and some of the weaknesses as well.
Yeah, I mean, not the best 2 for me to come back to. I didn't feel.
Yeah.
As I watch them, I'm like, oh, I think I remember this more fondly from 3 months ago than maybe it is.
It is funny how that works, huh?
Well, before we get into it, Jordan, since we're back to Kolchak, I got a little thing here for you. It's our own version of a Mary F. Kill. I'm gonna do this for you. You can figure it out. There's not a lot of characters, so it'll go quick. But I've come up with the categories per your origination of this game, and they're bad. They're bad categories, but here they are.
I like it already.
You're gonna choose one to hire to write for your paper.
Yep.
And that's the equivalent of being married to them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You're going to bribe one for some information, and I guess that is the equivalent to having sex with somebody.
Yep. Sure.
And finally, you're going to choose one of them to get killed by an unstoppable supernatural being. That one's self-explanatory.
Right. Okay. Good. All right.
So there's only 2 categories. There's only two rounds of this game because there's not that many characters on the show.
This show it's Kolchak. If you like Kolchak, you like the show. If you don't like Kolchak, you're not watching. That's really, there's no other characters to grab onto, really.
So these characters are almost in every episode, and that is Carl Kolchak, Tony Vincenzo, and Ron Updike.
Okay.
So it's hire to write, bribe, and get killed by a monster.
I think as much as it would make sense to hire Kolchak to write, I think it's pretty well established that he's not a great employee. So I'd hire Tony Vincenzo.
I think he's a solid choice. I'd like to spend time with him.
Yeah. And I would have to. What's the second option?
To bribe for some information. To pay a bribe to you're gonna spend a little bit of time with him, but not too much.
I think that's how much time I want to spend with Kolchak. So he's my option for that. And,
he's your source.
Yeah, and unfortunately to Ron, he's got to go. A malevolent force is going to kill him.
Poor Ron, but it's his destiny, I think.
It really is. That's what he's there for. You'd probably agree with those picks, wouldn't you?
Yeah, I think those are all solid choices. You know, I could go either way on Vincenzo and Kolchak. It might be nice to spend some time, but it's hard to say. I think your reasoning was solid.
Yeah, yeah. Because in these episodes, again, it sort of makes me remember he's not a very good reporter in terms of in terms of what he's supposed to do. You know.
And this second category was more difficult than you'd imagine. But I was trying to come up with. I'm like, who else is in this show?
Can I guess? I'm going to guess who the people are.
Yeah, go for it.
You got your Marmalstein.
Of course.
You got your Emily.
Yep. But can you get the third one? This is the hard one.
I bet you it's that reporter lady.
Which reporter lady?
Oh, she was only in one episode, then she died.
Oh, see, it didn't qualify. Only one episode. So you know who it is. It's Marmalstein, Mrs. Emily, or Miss Emily, I apologize. She's not married. And Gordy the Ghoul Spangler.
Oh, Gordy the Ghoul.
He
I
got only 2 episodes, but he did seem like he was going to be a reoccurring.
Is he never coming back?
We haven't seen him in quite some time.
Right, Gordy the Ghoul. I think I'll hire Miss Emily because I think she seems Miss Emily, right? Is her name?
Miss Emily. That's correct.
I think she's reliable. She always seems to be at the office. She always seems to have a smile on her face. She seems like a personable person to have around, and she's also good to help out with things. So she's who I'd hire at the paper.
Okay.
I'd pay off Marmal. No, actually, no. I'm going to change it. I was going to pay off Marmalstein, but then I realized Gordy the Ghoul is perfect for that. That's all he wants.
That is his whole thing.
So I guess I'll just stick with what he's good at. I'll pay him off, and unfortunately for Marmalstein, just like in the show, she's just going to go the way of the dodo.
Technically, she didn't die in the show. She just disappeared completely.
She's been killed. It was just by another malevolent force we didn't see.
Kolchak wasn't involved in that particular case.
He was supposed to. He just didn't get around to it.
Well, that's it, Jordan. You did it. You picked your favorites and your least favorites, I guess.
Yeah. Well, you know what? And I do like the cast of characters in the show. We've said it before. I think it is a weird weakness of the show that they don't want to lean into them more because there's several opportunities they have where they could utilize these characters more, especially when he's looking for information, but they just, for whatever reason, don't want to do that.
It is true. Even just going through kind of the side characters have slowly got, like Marmalstein has just quietly disappeared. So is Gordy the Ghoul. Like, all great side characters who really, it's probably a sign of the times more than anything, but if they had leaned into having some of these quirky side characters and like brought them more into the investigations, I think the show would have gelled way more.
Agreed.
Anyway, it is time for the first episode. Here's the IMDb summary for episode 11, pardon me.
Horror in the Heights.
Horror in the Heights. Residents of the Roosevelt Heights neighborhood are being caught off guard and killed by a demon with the ability to appear as a person they know and trust.
Now, I had a weird feeling when watching this episode. Horror in the Heights felt, in some ways, like Bad Medicine again. But this was, I would say, slightly with a more deft hand. Now, I'm going to say slightly. Yes. I don't think it's quite as offensive as Bad Medicine. Now, it's problematic, but I think there's a little bit more nuance and a little bit more respect given, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, once again, I think this is what we're seeing is going to be a trend on this, is to get a supernatural monster, they will lean into another culture's mythology. And as a result, you've kind of got Kolchak investigating another culture, and that other is treated they're not overtly disrespectful, but certainly leans into all the stereotypes they can find.
Yes.
And what's especially weird here is it's 2 separate cultures they choose from, and 2 very distinct cultures that all stereotypes are on the table for both of them.
Yeah, exactly. But you do make an interesting point, though. The idea of different mythology from different cultures on paper is a very good idea, and it creates something interesting and something that the characters from a very North American perspective may not have that much information about. But it's the way that they handle it that things become complicated.
It's a classic TV trope where you need to do a monster of the week, so you just like pull someone else's monster, and then you have to watch your lead character who is not of that culture make some pretty broad generalizations and then like save the day. And in 2022, it feels like a minefield more than anything.
Yeah. Well, and let me just say this right off the bat. the swastika is a real point to this episode.
Heavily
It's heavily featured, which it's odd to see on, for one, how many swastikas are in the show. But my question to you is, this aired, what year did this air? 74, 75, something like that?
Yeah, something in that area. I don't remember.
Yeah. So let's say mid-70s. Do you not think it was common knowledge that the swastika was originally was co-opted by the Nazis as a symbol? I think we all knew it was from East Asian culture. Correct?
Yeah, I mean, that's the twist of the episode. We're in the Heights. It's a heavily Jewish neighborhood, and it's heavily decorated with swastikas that for the little while go very uncommented on, which I thought was like a weird but interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And then later we'll find out they're only there because a Hindu man has put them up on the walls in an effort to ward off evil, because in the Hindu faith apparently they're postulating it's a talisman to ward off evil. I don't think that's quite what it does actually, but like that's the premise. And the surprise of the episode they're trying to purvey to you is that like the Nazis didn't originate it. It actually comes from a different culture, and the Nazis sort of co-opted it. I think it probably, among certain people, it probably was knowledge, but I don't think it was maybe common knowledge.
Okay, so that was because when I watched it, it was literally the first thing I saw, the juxtaposition of this Jewish quarter, as it were, and the swastika. I was like, oh, I guess it's just going to be the Hindu symbol. Like it just seems so obvious, but again, maybe that's unfair, and that's looking from a slightly more modern perspective.
Well, it's interesting because we'll get into it here. I was surprised when I saw it originally because there was no indication there was going to be any, like it was very quickly you see it's in a Jewish neighborhood that's quite poor in Chicago. And we're seeing essentially, I think this is a fictitious neighborhood. I could not find a Roosevelt Heights in Chicago personally. I could be incorrect. It might be existing.
Yeah, I don't know Chicago, so.
I could not find it. But apparently it was a formerly plush neighborhood that has basically aged out. Its population has ended up being quite elderly and lives a bit on the margins. And they go back and forth. But it seems over the course of the episode to be a primarily Jewish neighborhood is the idea behind it.
Mm-hmm.
And what we see is, per usual, it starts with a murder by a supernatural being. And this time what it's happening is a group of old men who sneak off every, I believe it's Friday night, to play poker together, penny ante poker. So their wives can't sue them and get angry at them for doing it and breaking Sabbath, I think is the idea behind it.
I thought it was kind of cute. It was like a bunch of old guys just playing, because they even make the joke, the one guy, they want him there even though they don't like him, but because he's been known to lose as much as 75 cents in a night, which is funny.
And that guy they don't love playing with, but he likes to lose. He's a security guard at some sort of industrial like butcher abattoir. Like it's a big thing, and they go there because he's the security guard at night so they can use it and not have to worry about getting caught.
Here's the thing, and so they really want to establish that the neighborhood it's not up to its former glory. So things are to really show that there's a real rat problem, that they sort of keep saying like the city's not helping us take care of the rats, but they're just leaving gigantic containers of meat just out in the open in an area they know is infested. It's like, well, you're not helping the problem at all. Maybe put a lid on that.
I was also just like, I would not want to get meat from this particular industrial butcher place.
Yeah, it was gross.
As they start playing the game, the security guard's just like, oh, I'll go get us some glasses so we can have some drinks. And he wanders off through this big industrial building. And as he's walking, he hears something and he turns and he sees his rabbi who's like by a garbage can there. And he's just like, oh, my rabbi's here. And he's just like, hey, did my wife send you? Sorry, we're here gambling. And he's like, it's very friendly. And the rabbi sort of holds his arms out as if requesting a hug, to which this man's just like, sure, I'll give you a hug. But what we, the audience, know is, he sees his rabbi, we see a very large, Bigfoot-looking creature, very hairy, very monstrous, very tall.
Yeah, they don't leave it for the viewer to wonder what's happening. You know right away, this is a monster who is changing how it looks based on a person's own mind, I guess.
Yes, it can apparently read your mind, pick a person who you like or trust, I suppose. Is what they'll say later. It's like someone you trust, and then it'll offer you a hug, and it'll kill you in that hug.
Yeah, it does. A killer bear hugs. Question, though. Up until the very end of this episode, we see this several times where people will see this creature and it kind of puts its arms out in a very sort of loving embrace gesture, but it never says anything.
No.
And I thought that was part of it, was that it never says anything because it's an image. It's not an actual an actual creation of the person. But then later at the very end of the episode, it does talk. Don't you think that they broke their rule a little bit?
No, I actually think that what happened is, and I get it, I think it makes sense, is, and we're jumping ahead a bit, but at the end, obviously, Kolchak's going to have to run into it, and it's going to have to appear as someone he trusts. And the problem is you can't have much suspense in that moment,
right?
If you don't know. So at the end, when it appears as someone he trusts, that person talks and like tries to convince him that they are not, in fact, this monster. And I do agree, we never see it talk, and it does seem like it doesn't have that ability, but I think the writers were just like, that scene would have just played with literally no tension.
Right, because it would have just kept walking closer without saying anything. So you'd be like, well, we know it's the monster.
Yeah. So I don't think you're wrong. I also was like, went back and forth on like, are you breaking your own rules? But I did at least give it, because I felt at least it was a tense moment at the end that I don't think would have worked otherwise.
Right, fair enough.
But you're right. It up till the end, it does not appear to speak or be able to talk at all.
Yeah, and the only reason I mentioned that, I know it seems like I'm splitting hairs, is because it almost seems like they go out of their way to not have the creature speak.
Absolutely.
Because the characters sort of stand there almost zombie-like and seem kind of confused because it actually is the monster. So that's why I was like, you guys bending things. But
You're
again,
not
it's not
wrong.
like
It's a bit sloppy. I mean, the whole episode's a bit sloppy.
Yeah.
Anyway, Carl, of course, he hears about this death on his police radio, and he thinks it sounds a little suspect. He's got that reporter's brain. He hears something, he's like, dead man. I think that's a little suspect.
Yeah, but you know what? Like, this is one of the few times he takes a story and he sort of pitches it. He pitches it to Vincenzo as like an actual local newspaper story, which is senior citizens who are sort of living in squalor, who are being left behind in society, and there isn't the same a safety net from the government to keep these people healthy.
Yeah, well, that's what he goes to check out the body, and he has a look at it, and it's quite, apparently we're told it's quite badly eaten, and the police are blaming it on rats.
Right.
And when he finds, the poker game buddies are hanging out and they're quite distraught over the death of their friend. And they're like, he only left like 30 minutes ago. If he had a heart attack and died, those rats must have eaten him very quickly. And Kolchak's like, well, there are a lot of rats here. It's weird, but there are a lot of rats here. And if there's that many rats to like devour a body that quickly, the city really has let these people down. It's very much, he's like, this is a public interest story. This is a story about the government or the city failing people. And that's how, it's certainly how he puts this together.
I think it's the first time in this show so far where we see him pitch a story like that. It's not like he was like, also, I think there might be a monster involved, Yeah,
I mean, it definitely, it's an interesting start. I liked it. It was kind of a different take for Kolchak to start on this story.
Mm-hmm.
Also, Jordan, did you notice when he goes and interviews the people who are at that poker game, one of them, when they're talking to him, he introduced himself. I'm Kolchak. I'm a local reporter, blah, blah. And one of the guys at that poker game says, aren't you with the health department?
That's right. Yeah.
And Kolchak obviously waves. I was like, I think you're thinking of my brother. Like, that kind of thing. We've seen that guy before in a different episode where Kolchak introduced himself as being from the health department.
I know. He was the janitor.
He worked, building supervisor in that, the Moss murders, the one with the Moss man in the basement. I was just like, I really liked that they're like, brought that character back. It's a nice little piece of continuity that I wish they would do more of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I realized after too, because it was such a weird line that came in, and I was thinking, the way I was able to realize is I paused it and I went and checked the credits, and I was like, oh, it is actually the same actor who was in that other episode.
It was nice. This is where I was like, why don't you need to do this more, you guys. Bring back Marmelstein. Give Marmelstein episodes. Like this is like, it makes the world feel lived in. I really liked it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But at any rate, Kolchak's pitching the story. Vincenzo's like, he's willing to hear about it. He's like, go out there, do some more reporting. Let's get a feature on this going. And we also get to hang out with Miss Emily a little at the office, in a rare occasion.
Is this, now I might be mixing them up, is this the episode where she's trying to write a novel?
Yes, this is where she reveals that she's only working at the paper because she's working on a detective novel, and she likes to use the like free paper and typewriters here to help work on that detective novel.
I was like, that's fun. That's a fun little character.
It just makes me want an episode with Miss Emily. Like, I'm just like, bring Miss Emily into this. But she says that she also that week is filling in on the advice column, which I thought was her full-time job, but
again, they don't really know what to do with a lot of these characters. I don't think anyone's paying terrible attention, which is funny in an episode where you're bringing reference to another minor character that Kolchak talked to for 10 seconds. They're bringing that reference back, but they can't keep track of what Miss Emily does.
Well, and Miss Emily's character, I think she's had a few different names over the course of the series as well, so she's slowly becoming who she is. But there's a really weird part here, and I could never quite figure it out. But Miss Emily's like, I'm having trouble with this one letter. Will you have a look at it? And Kolchak looks at it and says, oh, you should recommend to him a series of hormone doses. And I didn't understand what the joke or the reference was at all.
I didn't really either. The only thing I could guess is later on she goes on a date with a guy.
Well, that's
right?
it. At the end of the episode, we cut back, and this 72-year-old man who wrote this letter, who Kolchak's like, he needs a series of hormone doses. He shows up and he's like there to take Miss Emily out on a date. And he's like, well, that'll fix that. And I'm just like, I don't understand what this was trying to make.
I think what they're trying to do is it's an advice column, and he has some sort of sexual dysfunction or something.
You think it was erectile dysfunction he was writing to the newspaper about?
Yeah, I think it's something along those lines, I think is what it is. But it's so unimportant because it doesn't really matter to anything. It's just like a weird kind of line.
It was such a weird sequence with such a weird answer that I couldn't suss out. I was like, at first I'm like, is he making a joke about like this man's trying to transition? He needs hormone doses. Like, I was like, is that the joke? And then he shows up later. He's just like going on a date with Emily. I'm like, wait, was that a boner joke that I was supposed to understand?
I think it's a boner joke.
Yeah, wild. But yeah, it's very fun. We get to see a little Miss Emily and learn about her aspirations of writing a detective novel.
I was going to say, the reason they drop that in is to give some, like you said, give a little tension later on when you're going to see her maybe be the monster, because the idea is that she's out researching a detective novel. So it's plausible she'd be out in an alley.
Right. Back to the plot anyway. That night, another elderly couple decides to take a shortcut after going to a movie through an alley. An alley they themselves say is like, I think people have been murdered down this alley. I'm like, don't go down murder alley, you guys.
Yeah. Luke, you and I are going to a movie, and we're walking back to our car, and we've parked far away. And then we know there's an alley that someone has just been murdered in. And I say to you, do you want to take the shortcut through the alley? Would you take it?
I say, what are the odds there's going to be 2 murders in 2 nights? Pretty unlikely.
Yeah, I guess that's true. I guess you could say that.
I will say,
I'd stay away.
If that is the place that man was like died, I guess they don't think it was a murder. They think rats killed him. So of course there's no police presence. So it's fair, I think. I was going to say
right.
The police should be staking that alley out, but no one thinks it was suspect. So
yeah, that's true.
But yes, they go down this very swastika covered alley.
Yeah, and again, it's all going to tie together, but it is odd to see these characters not react at all to these hateful images.
And at this point, I did not realize this was going to become something to do with like the Hindu faith or whatever. Like, I didn't realize that's the trajectory it was on. And I thought it was like, I was like, is this just is this what the mise-en-scène of people's lives is in 1974, that there are just this many swastikas around that you would put them up as like set deck in a show uncommented upon? Because I'm like, this is a Jewish neighborhood, these are all Jewish people. I'm like, living under this kind of like, I'm like, is this what life would like? This is like so oppressive and like disturbing.
I knew it wasn't because it was too
they're so prominently placed.
Yeah, they're everywhere, and they're also like, they're not well done. It's just like every couple feet there's just another one, and you're like, okay, it's too much to not be.
They were just so uncommented on that I didn't know what to do with them at first.
Mm-hmm.
At any rate, this couple walks down this alley, they hear something, and they're like, oh, someone down here. And then a police officer just steps out from around a corner and like holds his arms out for a big hug, and they're so relieved. This couple's so relieved it's not a monster. They're like, let's go hug this cop. Of course, they're both dead moments later.
Yeah. I'll make one slight correction. I don't think it's a police officer. I think it is a security guard that they know.
I guess so. They said he was a police officer.
Oh, okay, maybe you're right. I thought it was that it was a security guard that they knew. That's why he was someone familial.
Well, as we
familiar to
learn,
them.
it's supposed to be someone you trust, so I guess this must be someone they both knew, I suppose.
Right.
But anyway, more people are dead, and one of those old guys from the poker game, he calls up Kolchak, and he's just like, hey, there's these new deaths, you got to get down here, something's up. Like, this one guy from the poker game is really suspect of all these deaths that are happening. And when Kolchak goes down to check it out, he sees the same thing. Rats have eaten the bodies. And this old man tells him, he says, like, listen, I've got a really good idea that someone's killing these people, and I think I know who. So the old man takes Kolchak to see a Indian restaurant that recently opened up in this neighborhood, run by an old Indian man. And he says that this old Indian man has been going around the neighborhood painting swastikas everywhere.
You know what? There was something to this that I don't know how you would maybe lean into, but the idea that there's a neighborhood that's predominantly one culture, and someone from another culture moves in, and they are suspect of said person. I think there's some realism there that I think works, coupled with the fact of, obviously, if it's a Jewish neighborhood and this person is leaving what they see as very hateful symbols everywhere, yeah, you would also then think, yes, he must be the reason for these deaths. I believe
the old man says he's quite sure he's a Hindu Nazi of some sort.
Yeah.
And he takes Kolchak Brown back to the back alley behind the Indian restaurant, which has a big fence around it. He's like, says Kolchak should jump the fence. There's lots more swastikas he should get photos of behind the fence. And Kolchak, of course, jumps the fence, and the old man waits for him in the alley, basically, to come back. And as the old man waits for Kolchak to take his photos, he's sitting there, and then around the corner walks another Kolchak.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very, like, casually. It looks like he just hopped over the fence and walked around and started walking down the street. And we do get an interesting thing where the guy Starman, I think his last name is, he's sort of like, hey, what are you doing over there? And then Kolchak's like, I'm not over there. And then you just hear off screen a growl and like an attack, which is through this entire episode, we never actually really see the attack. You always just hear it.
Yeah. Kolchak jumps the fence and basically just finds glasses and shoes left from the old man who the monster just killed. But the owner of the restaurant sticks his head out from a door, and Kolchak hears him mumble the phrase Rakshasa, which is the monster's name we'll come to discover, and then disappears again. This old Indian restaurant owner disappears, and the Kolchak's left to wonder what's going on. And really weird, Kolchak like walks out of the alley. Two police are just happen to be walking by, and then they arrest him for the murder of the old man, but there's no body. It was all very weird.
Yeah, well, it's I mean, we've seen it before, which is Kolchak is always kind of at the wrong place at the wrong time, you know? So it's just like he's there with what looks like a murder scene, so they arrest him. It does become, the next scene's kind of a funny little, like, lighthearted moment where they joke about police brutality.
Yeah, it was really weird because they don't find a body, so there's no murder. Like, there's no body.
I think there is supposed to be a body, though. I think there's parts of a body.
Okay, but anyway, yeah, he's dragged in. It's just so we get another scene where Vincenzo goes and bails out Kolchak, and then Kolchak's back. It's so quick, and it just added 10 minutes, or just added 5 minutes to the show. There was no other purpose for it.
Yeah.
Kolchak basically is back on the street very quickly, and he goes to talk to an exterminator who once fumigated the INS offices.
Yeah, it's funny. He's just like, I mean, this is very Kolchak, right? Of like,
he wants to learn about rats, so he goes to talk to the only guy he knows who knows about rats.
Yeah, and I like that the guy really just keeps implying that the real problem is that Kolchak's like a slob.
That's my favorite part too. He's just like, yeah, I remember doing your office. You were the one with all that half-eaten food on your desk.
Yeah. Oh, and then there's a weird thing where like at one point the guy's spraying, because this is a very like Law and Order kind of scene where the person, no matter they're getting questioned, they just keep doing their job.
Yeah, they're just at work.
Yeah, and so he's spraying like some bushes and stuff, and at one point he accidentally sprays his sandwich and he starts eating it. Kolchak's like, you just sprayed your sandwich, and the guy's like, it's full of chemicals anyway. I was like, well, that's one way to look at it. I don't think it's full of poison though.
At any rate, the purpose of the exterminator is to basically confirm for Kolchak that there's no way rats could eat a human body in under a minute. It's just not possible. Yeah. It's like too difficult.
Again, I would assume most people would know that even if you had 50 rats eating a body, they're not piranhas, you know? Even piranhas can't do what we all think piranhas can do.
It's so funny you say that, and I don't know if you remember this, but literally that's the same thing that the exterminator says. He's like,
is that right?
Piranhas.
I don't remember.
It was such a weird reference to compare rats to piranhas. It made me laugh. At any rate, Kolchak decides he's better go check out that Indian restaurant, so he decides to go there for dinner, which is just, the whole scene at the dinner is weird. The guy checking them in, like the host or the waiter, is a white guy, and he's supposed to be a white guy who works at this
But you
restaurant.
don't know that at first.
I didn't know that at first either, because he's wearing a turban, and it's this whole thing, and I'm just like, ugh, is this the way they're going? But you get to learn it's kind of a gag that he works there but dresses this way.
And another callback. Did you recognize the actor?
No.
So it's a guy named Barry Gordon, and what we watched him in was he was playing the character of Billy in Supertrain, the guy who may or may not have been a murderer who was handcuffed the whole time in the train.
That's the same guy?
Same guy.
That's very funny. The
Yeah.
Woody Allen stand-in?
Yeah, one of the worst episodes of Supertrain.
At any rate, so it's already a little off color with this guy dressed in a turban serving Kolchak, and then he orders food, and they bring the food out, and they just make a bunch of jokes about how gross Indian food is and how it's going to give you diarrhea. And I'm just like, Indian food, literally one of the best foods on this planet. Like, this is like so dumb.
Well, there's a more interesting thing that they mention, and it's, I can't even remember what he orders. It's something that's meat based. And he mentions how little meat is in it. And at first I thought it was some sort of, like you're saying, because there's some other kind of like slams against the food. But really what the comment is that because I think there's this butcher is the supplier of meat, and because they're having such issues, there's just not enough meat in the neighborhood. I think that's what the comment they're making.
Do you think that's what they're trying to, like, that's the running
I thought that
thread?
was the comment, but I didn't really know how it all tied together. But that's how I kind of read it. Maybe I'm being too forgiving.
I think you might be too. I think the gag mostly is just like, isn't Indian food weird? It's just like, no, not really.
Well, regardless, it doesn't really matter much because he's really there to interview this waiter to kind of find out about the owner, who is this older Indian man who may or may not have been putting swastikas all over the neighborhood.
Yes. And what he says is he's like, yeah, he's a bit of a weirdo. He likes to ask people who live in the neighborhood if they ever see their loved ones out at night. And even if they're dead, and he's like, it's kind of a weird thing to ask people. I'm like, yes, then it's a weird thing to ask people.
And he also mentions that the guy is very insistent that he has to wash his hands before handling food, and how weird that is.
So this is such a weird episode.
Yeah.
Kolchak, anyway, he excuses himself to go to the bathroom, but instead he sneaks into the basement of the restaurant, I guess, which you have to get through by going through the backyard of the. None of it makes any sense, the layout.
Well, what I think it is the guy has like an apartment in the back of behind the restaurant. It's sort of like a dual, like a duplex property.
It doesn't. The layout is confusing. Anyway, in the basement, he finds this man has a bedroom in this basement full of candles and a bed and whatever. And Kolchak's taking photos when the owner comes in. He walks in. He's quite elderly and looks quite ill, like he's barely able to stand, but he is holding a crossbow. Mm-hmm. And he takes a pot shot with his crossbow at Kolchak, and Kolchak takes off.
Yeah, he just misses Kolchak, and Kolchak gets away. So again, at this point of the episode, you think maybe he is a bad person or he's doing bad things. But I think, again, even at the time, I think the viewer has probably clued in at this point as what's happening. Yeah.
Because that night, the Rakshasa's up to its old antics again. This time it finds a couple cops on patrol. One cop, when it sees his a guy named Sergeant Davino, who I guess is a mentor of his, who's in the hospital. So he's confused about that. And the other cop sees his mother. So they both see different things.
It's funny, though, because you would think that would stop them, but it doesn't, because they're just not listening to each other. The one guy's like, hey, my mom's there. And the other guy's like, no, it's the sergeant. And they're like, what are you talking about? Anyway, that's it. That's it.
One of them gets killed, and the other one lives long enough to mention there's a difference, or he's alive. Kolchak will later hear they both saw different things, and they seem to imply the one who survived is now, I guess, maybe locked up for mental health concerns.
Right. That's the solution.
But this basically gets Kolchak back on the street because he's heard about this. He's told Vincenzo that he did some research and discovered that the swastika isn't just a Nazi symbol. It's also a Hindu one. So this is where we get our history lesson about that. Mm-hmm. And he goes to visit. He's got I need more information on what's going on here. Something's up. So I better go visit somebody who has some idea about Hinduism and that. So I'll go find this white antiques dealer who sells what certainly aren't legally acquired artifacts from India.
It was really weird, wasn't it? And I mean, this is in line with the show. This is not the first time we've seen Kolchak go to a museum to get information. Again, the Bad Medicine episode, it was the same thing.
Yeah,
and this is a replication of that same scene, which is we're going to go to this white person. They're going to tell us about this culture, and then I'm going to see like something on the wall that shows me the information I need that's conveniently there. But it is a weird way to go about this that they've now done multiple times.
I mean, it's certainly a sign of the times, and sign of many, like in TV, and even probably till very recently. It's just very funny to watch someone like want to get information on a culture, just go and find the whitest person they can find, tell them about it.
Yeah, because I mean, again, even when he went to the Indian restaurant, which you're like, okay, I guess you could. That's one way to get information. He talks to the white waiter.
Yeah, they're just not. There are no actors available of these ethnicities. You can't get them. They just don't exist.
So anyway, the point is this, the scene goes on for a while and Kolchak's like purposely annoying.
Did you like the antique dealer's joke?
Oh, what was the joke again?
He's showing some people a statue and he's just like, I believe he says the statue is from when the cult of Kali flowered. And then that nobody does anything. He explains like, get it? Cauliflower?
That's right.
And I'm like,
it wasn't really a joke.
All this for this one joke, you guys. Good job.
Yeah. So anyways, he sort of annoys the guy. He gets a bit of information. The guy doesn't want him in the store, but Kolchak does his usual thing where he's touching stuff. And eventually the guy gives him a little bit of the information he needs. And then, as I mentioned, he sort of sees on the wall it's not really a painting, but it's some sort of visual representation of this Rakshasa character, this sort of evil spirit that possesses a man's mind, is what they say.
Yeah, so I've got did you not get all the details about what the Rakshasa is?
Well, it's an evil spirit that possesses a man's mind.
It's a disciple of the evil Ravanana,
sure,
who possesses a man's mind, eats their flesh, and it sends its emissaries into the living world to determine if now is the right time for their reappearance. And the only way it can be killed is with a crossbow and blessed arrows.
I like that it was specifically a crossbow. So it's if you're using a bow and arrow, not going to work.
Not going to work, my friend. Got to have you a crossbow.
Yeah. And then, by the way, I was watching this late at night, and this led me into Wikipedia and then into other places. I just spent more time than I should have just reading about crossbows.
You are a lot like, there's something I wasn't going to talk about, but you are a lot like Ron Updike.
Sadly, I am. But I was just like, oh, that's kind of interesting. And then I got way into reading. Anyways, it was one of those little wormholes.
It was the most random sequence in the show where Kolchak walks in the office and says something about you have to use a crossbow, and then Ron Updike just gives a history of crossbows and longbows from medieval times for like 30 seconds. He just gives them like a weird history about them that's unrelated to anything, and they just stare at him and you're like, get out of here, Ron.
Well, it started with because I wanted to see how authentic it was from that specifically time period in that region for crossbows. That's what because I knew that's where crossbows originally came from, but I was trying to see how authentic that was. But then I just got caught on my own little like reading about bows and arrows.
You and Ron Updike would just sit down and have a great combo. At any rate, Kolchak has information on what this is and how to kill it. So he returns to the restaurant owner's place and finds the restaurant owner in bed. He seems, I don't know if he's injured or if he's just dying of old age. He just seems very
dying
infirm.
of old age. Yeah. And this is an interesting idea that if the show wasn't so specifically and narrowly focused on Kolchak, I think there's a fun team up or something that can happen. There's almost like a Buffy the Vampire Slayer thing going on.
Well, that's exactly what this man is.
Yeah. He's an old guy. He's spent his life chasing this creature, this force.
Not just this creature. There's a bunch of them. Like he hunts rakshasas.
Yeah, and which is really cool. It's like this idea, and he's been doing it for so long, and he realizes, and he tells Kolchak, "Hey, sorry I shot at you, but to be fair, this thing can look like other people. I've been doing this for so long, and I realize I'm getting too old. That's the reason I missed you. I'm just too old, and I can't see very well. I can't move very well, and I need someone else to do this sort of thing." And I thought there was a maybe not better episode, but maybe less traditional for this show, where it could have been him sort of almost training Kolchak to become this person, or Kolchak helping him find the next person that would stop this force, or I don't know. There's something in there that I think they only really give a scene to, and I'm like, I think there's maybe a at least a more interesting episode.
It is funny because right at the end he does explain this. Like, he's 80, he's been hunting them his whole life. He's killed quite a few, but he has no one to pass on this legacy to. And he looks at Kolchak. He's like, well, it's not you for sure. Like, look at you. And I'm just like, okay. I'm like, that's the plot to an entire episode. And you guys just were like, never mind. He just like kind of gives Kolchak the crossbow to protect himself, but he's not like, take over for me or anything. He's just like, you're not going to work. So I guess I'll die and no one will take over.
But you know what I mean? Like, this is not... They have a formula, and their formula works to some extent, so I get why they don't want to get out of that. But it was like, you guys had this right here. This even just the last act can be something different, but they're just like, no, that's not what this show is. So we now have the information. Now it's going to be Kolchak has what he needs, which is this crossbow and arrows, these blessed arrows, and so we know what the third act is going to be.
I have one serious question for you, though. You are a man who has hunted Rakshasas for 80 years. Or for 60 years. You're 80 years old now. You've been hunting them your whole life. That's your whole reason for being. Why did you start an Indian restaurant as your cover? That's so much more work for you. So much more unnecessary work for you.
I know. And it's not to like get bogged down, but it could have just been a line of dialogue of it's some sort of front. He needs it as like who knows? He needs it to be able to get into the country. He needed a business or something. And maybe it's like, who cares? But it is funny because you're like, well, you've chosen a very difficult business to run. That's going to take a lot of your time away from, Rakshasa hunting.
Yeah, I was laughing so hard. I'm just like, this is the worst cover you could have possibly chosen.
Yeah. Anyways, it doesn't. The important point is he's out of the episode. Don't give him any more screen time. And Kolchak has the crossbow.
Yeah, Kolchak has a crossbow now. This is, of course, where he walks out and bumps into Mrs. Emily. She's hiding behind a thing. And as we said, now the Rakshasa can speak for the first time. It's trying to convince Kolchak that it's Miss Emily, that Miss Emily was following him because she was getting research done for her detective novel and not to shoot her with that crossbow. I thought it was tense enough. Like, I actually was like not 100% sure which way they're going to go with it. And I will say, when he finally does shoot Miss Emily in the chest with that crossbow, it's very funny watching Miss Emily get hit with that crossbow before turning into the monster. It was nicely done.
Yeah. And now, could you imagine if they just said, you know what, we're going to go in a different direction. He's actually going to accidentally shoot Emily.
I considered it for a second. I'm like, it would be wild if this turned out to actually be Miss Emily and he shot her.
Yeah. Yeah, but it's not what they do. Of course, he does shoot she shoots the creature who dies.
I love it. When he shoots the creature and then it becomes a creature, it just kind of like falls over very gently.
Yeah. Well, it had those blessed arrows.
That's true. And, it kind of ends with the classic denouement scene, which I'd forgotten about, but is a Kolchak classic. He kind of just like is writing up his story, dictating his thoughts around it. And there's nothing really. He sort of mostly talks about how he would never tell Miss Emily he shot her because she'd be too sad about it. Is his conclusion to the episode. And I have a legitimate question for you here, Jordan. Is this has to be the first time ever that Kolchak has the evidence of the supernatural creature he defeated and actually can publish a story?
Yeah, you might be right. I was wondering about that too because I couldn't remember in previous episodes, like, what is he ever publishing? It's never quite clear, but I guess you might be right. This might be the first time he can go case closed.
It's the only time they've ever ended an episode where they haven't explained like why he isn't able to publish. And I'm just like, so I think this is it. I think he actually has now caught a monster, proved it, and now is able to write a story about it. I'm like, maybe this is what it is. Maybe this is why he's able to stay employed. Is one out of every like 25 times he does this, he actually he actually gets evidence. And so, he's able to stay in business as a writer.
Right. Now, I got a question for you. Do you think the restaurant, I can't remember what they called the restaurant, Lakshmi restaurant, do you think it stayed in business after this?
I can't imagine. With that one waiter taking over, I don't think so.
You're probably right.
All right. Shall we move on to episode 2?
Yeah, Mr. Ring, or Ring.
Here is the IMDb summary for episode 12, Mr. Ring.
I don't know when exactly I was in this office last. In some ways it seems like I never left. But no, that's not right. For at least a few days I was away. Far away in the hands of men with no faces and no names. They broke me down, broke my story down, telling me how it hadn't happened the way I claimed. At least I think that's what they did. between injections.
Kolchak investigates a U.S. military-developed weapon called Ring, a robot which uses deadly force to defend itself against those who would harm it.
What did Ring stand for? Did you write it down?
You want to know what Ring stands for? They don't tell us till very late in the episode, but I've got it written down. Give me a second. Ring stands for Robomatic Internalized Nerve Ganglia.
I knew it was something dumb. Ring is better, I guess. Ganglia ruins it.
You think Ganglia is the thing that... or not Robomatic, though.
Robomatic's fine. Ganglia, if I was in that conference room, I would have laughed and laughed. I'm going to say one thing about Ring, Mr. Ring. He looks so much like Questor at one point. A TV movie watched way, way back. In terms of that, putty-like skin. They have he's wearing like a leotard all over. But he has a what I love. I love this time period of the robotic faces. So you have he's got lights and wires and stuff that don't seem to have any function. But for whatever reason, they've decided to give him pronounced sort of face. There's no actual eyes or mouth or anything like that. There's no features, but his face is pushed out.
Yeah,
it's very weird looking.
Got a human body.
Yeah,
but his head is basically a human's head, but there's a porthole on the front of it that extrudes outward, and that inside is not a face, but just lights and wires and circuits. So there's no face at all. It's just a porthole with just electronics in the center of it, where the face should be.
Now, let me ask you. Is that because he wasn't finished, or because they were we want to make him as humanoid as possible, but who cares about a face?
I think they didn't care about the face. I think that's what it was.
Right. It just is so odd to make everything else so lifelike, and then make it looks like a person walking around with an old iMac on their head.
I will say this. It makes for a very disturbing robot to look at, which is the point of the episode. You're supposed to be afraid of this robot. And I was just I would not want to bump into this robot. I would also be afraid of it.
What the robot does is it puts a mask on top to look more humanoid, and that somehow makes it look way creepier.
It's honestly, I thought of the monsters they fought, and I was like, this one, there's something very unnerving about this one.
Yes.
Because anyway, this episode starts. It's a bit of a shift on formula for Kolchak. It's interesting. They have done things where it starts with Kolchak telling you the story at the end. So it's kind of after the episode's over, we're getting a precursor. But for some reason, Kolchak this time seems very confused. He's complaining his memory's fading, and he's got to dictate into his dictaphone as much as he can remember before it goes. And I was I'm okay, what an interesting way to start this. I don't know where this is headed now.
Yeah, he's very disoriented and sort of disheveled, and he even admits, I don't even know if I'm remembering this properly because of, he says at one point, he's what they did to me. Maybe they put electrodes on my head. I don't know. And you're oh, what has just happened? But he's I got to get it down as fast as I can because
it was a
it's all
nice
I have.
Tease to the episode. I was oh, what is going to happen in this episode? But yeah, basically we immediately see this Mr. Ring robot. I don't think they ever call him Mr. Ring in the episode, but since that's the name of it, we're going to call him Mr. Ring.
Mr. Ring.
He's at this Tyrell Institute, which I guess is a secret government installation that makes stuff for the military.
Yeah. Which is synonymous with evil.
Yes, exactly. And Mr. Ring essentially is escaping from a bed he's laying on, killing the doctor who's working on him, and escaping off into the night, basically. And we see
it's that scene you've seen a million times. It's he's laying on the bed, the doctor's not paying attention, he sits up, kills the doctor, and then breaks out.
And Mr. Ring seems to go on a rampage. He kills a postal worker who loves hot Texas chili. He's addicted to it, we're told.
That was one of the things I loved about Kolchak, is Kolchak in his voiceover gives the most specific details of people that really don't have any reason to be spoken other than it just colors the characters.
Yeah, and the postal worker's only killed for basically Terminator-style reasons, is the robot just needs a set of clothes, so he's not a man in a bodysuit walking around. He gets the postal worker's clothes. As you said, he then smashes a store window and steals a mask in an effort to give him more of a human face. But as you said, the mask he steals is something from The Purge or Friday. Yeah. He puts on a serial killer mask, essentially. It's scarier almost than the face is. It's actually awesome because it's just if you were to knock that mask off and then you saw the circuit board porthole behind it, It would be like it's a nightmare. It's a nightmare come to life. This robot.
Yeah, and then we're gonna say later on, it's like there's something funny about it. The robot, it's like it doubles down. It's like my face looks weird. Here, I'll put a human face on. He's like, not enough, and then he puts like plaster and stuff on his face, like cosmetic type stuff, which makes him even creepier looking because now he just looks like a clay monster person. And I just thought it was funny.
A little later in the episode, yeah, he's gonna break into a mortuary to steal basically putty and makeup they use on corpses to make them like have an open casket, and we literally get a scene where the robot sculpts, because the mask is a human mask, but it's like orange and got a star on it. Like it looks like it's not a mask, like a hockey helmet or something. It doesn't quite look like a human's face, so he uses it as a template to sculpt a putty human face over top of it. But he's not a very good sculptor, so it looks so like it looks so terrifying.
Yeah, he ends up having that sort of like Michael Myers-esque sort of look to him. That's very blank human face.
Very much falls into that like slasher thing where like a Michael Myers or a Jason who is like an unstoppable killer. Because every time we see him, he's just like throwing people around. He can walk through walls. It's a very... For what's a bit of a letdown in the end, it's a very potentially scary like monster on the loose. Mm-hmm. At any rate, this monster's on the loose, this robot, and Kolchak doesn't know anything about it yet, though. He arrives at work at INS, and apparently he was playing hooky from work the day before because he gets called into Vincenzo's office immediately. And it's a very funny scene. I quite like this, where Vincenzo's is like, where were you yesterday? And he's just like, oh, you remember that drowning that happened up at Lake wherever, like just north of the city? He's like, something seemed a little off to me about the findings the police had about the drowning. So I went up to check it out. And Vincenzo's like, well, what'd you find? He's like, oh, I found they were right. So I stuck around and fished all day.
Yeah. And so as a punishment, Vincenzo has like a real easy story for a reporter, which was, I can't even remember what it was, but it's basically like, go down to San Francisco and like have a good time. So he sends Ron, and then Kolchak's very irritated because he wanted to go down to San Francisco.
Yeah, well, it's the trial of the century is happening in San Francisco, and it would have been Kolchak's case because he's a better reporter for it. But because he wasn't there yesterday, Ron got it, and now Kolchak has to do Ron's job, and that's write an obituary about the computer scientist who died the other day.
Which, of course, for our purposes is great because now he's on the case that we know about.
And Kolchak, he needs to get some background on the dead scientist, so he goes to visit the deceased's widow, and she's a little drunk.
Great character, by the way.
Yeah, she's pretty good, and she sort of tells Kolchak, she's like, oh, my husband works at the Terrell Institute. I'm told he had a heart attack, but no one will let me see the body. And he's just like, Kolchak's like, what's the Terrell Institute? I've never heard of it. And she's like, of course not. It's like the most secret organization in the military. No one hears about it. I don't even know anything about it. The only thing I know is he was working on something called Project Ring. And this is all just to like, fire Kolchak's engines of like, this is very strange.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then she's also alludes that her husband may have been having an affair with someone else that worked at the company, this woman Leslie. And she's sort of like, again, she's being a little dramatic because she's been drinking, so she's obviously in mourning, but she's also upset. So she's like she's kind of just throwing off information, and she doesn't
she's
really
like,
care.
Go talk to this Dr. Leslie Dwyer. Maybe she knows what happened to him since they were so close. And she'll later retract that and be like, it was more of an intellectual affair and that they like had stuff to talk about, and I didn't care about what my husband did for a living.
Yeah.
And as Kolchak leaves, and he kind of noticed as he pulled up too, but there's someone from the Terrell Institute basically staking out the widow's house. And as Kolchak leaves, he's spotted this guy staking it out. He pulls up and is like, hey, see, you're here staking them out. Like, he kind of calls this guy out for like, I can tell what you're doing here. You're not so undercover that I don't see you. And this basically puts Terrell Institute on high alert that Kolchak's up to something.
Yeah, exactly. And Kolchak knows that the information is sensitive enough that just him questioning the wife has raised their alarm.
Exactly.
That they're following
and as he leaves, he picks up something on his police radio per usual, robbery in progress at a mortuary. And this is where Mr. Ring is stealing all the makeup from the morticians. And as he pulls up, Mr. Ring is like kicking his way through a window and then walking down the street, just like total chaos. He's tossing cops in the air. He's tearing like infrastructure off of buildings, collapsing it onto people. Mr. Ring is an unstoppable force, as most Kolchak bad guys are.
Now, do you think this works with what we are going to learn about Mr. Ring and his personality and his programming? Does this all make sense? How much destruction he's causing?
It's a bit nebulous what we're going to learn. It's because his purposes and goals, when we find out later, they seem to be to develop. Mr. Ring seems to be out to develop their, what would you say, their moral programming never got finished, and it wants to conclude its moral programming, its moral and ethical programming. But it's doing a lot of killing along the way. And I guess what we're supposed to know is, like, it's a child, so it hasn't quite learned everything. And, like, even in its early steps here are not to, like, conclude that its first goal is to, like, give itself a human face and kill as many people as it takes to get that human face.
Well, and I think they don't quite explicitly say it, but it sort of has a fight or flight response is all fight. Which, fine, I guess that makes sense. I just don't know. It seems like it's going out of its way to attack sometimes. I don't know if it quite works with what we learn later on. Because that's the feeling I had at the end. I was like, does that make sense?
Like the last episode, it's all a little sloppy. Because even here, as the cops are trying to stop it, one of, like, the cop in charge is like, don't shoot it. Whatever you do, you're not allowed to shoot it. And then it escapes, and Kolchak's like, which is a very funny commentary. He walks up, he's like, normally you cops are pretty trigger happy. Why aren't you shooting it? And he's just like, none of your business, Kolchak. And of course, Kolchak then sees this cop go talk to some military general who happens to be there. And Kolchak's like, that's weird. I'm going to follow the military general. That leads him back to the Terrell Institute as usual. And, Kolchak tries to talk his way in. Doesn't work. And he's just like, well, I better go talk to this Dr. Leslie Dwyer to find out what's happening at this Terrell Institute, because this appears to all be tied together.
So he does go talk to Leslie. I like how, again, she does not want him there, and he's just like, not a big deal. Come on in, and he gets some information from her.
Yeah, she won't tell him anything. She claims not to know anything about Ring, and she says she was laid off from the place, so she doesn't know anything. And Kolchak gets, like, this is another one of those, like, timestamp things that's, like, a little unfortunate for the character. He's just like, well, you're a little too pretty to be a scientist, aren't you?
Yeah, it's you're making it better than what it is. He's like. You got a great body into that dress. You have lovely legs. And he, like, goes on and stuff. And you're like, is that what Kolchak would say? But it's the only reason it's done is, yes, there's a little bit of just misogyny of the time. But also it's so the guy that's with her can come out in his bathrobe shaving to be like,
yeah, her very
over the line. Get out of here, buddy. Yeah. And that's really it. It's a way to get him out of the room, I guess.
Yeah. Basically, Kolchak gets kicked out by this boyfriend, and that concludes the scene.
Yeah.
I suppose it's also to let us know that she wasn't having an affair with the other scientists, but it's all, like, pointless, mostly.
Yeah, well, I thought it was going to be a thing where he was purposely, in kind of Kolchak fashion, like, playing the role of the cad to sort of, like, get a reaction out of her, but it's not what it is. He's being himself.
Yeah, and then they spin their wheels a little more. He goes to talk to the senator from Illinois, because he's, I guess, on the, what did they say, the appropriations committee that funds the Terrell Institute. But this guy also won't tell him anything. It's just like, he's just like, nah, I'm not telling you anything, and I'm going to call Terrell and the military and say that you're poking around. And the purpose of this, I guess, is he talks to the senator, and then when he goes back to the office, Vincenzo's just like, what have you done? I'm once again being threatened by the government. They're going to shut down the paper because of whatever you're poking your nose into.
Yeah. And I'll tell you, I think this was the weak part of this episode. I mean, there's several things, but the thing that bothered me was something you just said. He goes to the one person. They don't give him any information. Then he goes to the military place. They don't give him any information. Then he goes to the senator. They don't give him any information. Which makes sense because there's this high security, so no one wants to talk to him. But in terms of the structure of this episode, it's very hard because he needs to get information. We need Kolchak to get bits of information to put it together, but they're not giving it. So much of the episode has gone by at this point, and he still needs to piece things together. So how they do it is this library sequence that we're going to get, and I just think it's resolved in a very stupid way.
Yeah, it's because it makes sense. They want him to be stonewalled left and right. So yes. The way he puts together is immediately after this, he hears about a robbery at a library, and he goes there and, like, Mr. Ring has, like, literally, like, Kool-Aid manned his way through a wall.
yeah, and he's gone through and he looked at the books and said, not for me. He goes over to the audio tapes. What do they call them, like books for the blind or something?
They're books for the blind, as we would call them these days, audio books or books on tape. But in this world,
they gotta switch it back to books for the blind.
But yes, he's been there. Apparently, what he's done is he was stealing some books for the blind about philosophy and humanities, and he scared the librarian who was there. and because she saw his horrifying putty face when he busted through the wall. And this jogs Kolchak's memory. When he was at Dr. Dwyer's house, he remembered that she had a bunch of books for the blind at her place as well, also about philosophy. So he's just like, an interesting coincidence. And he goes to talk to Dr. Dwyer, but when he gets there, he finds out that Mr. Ring showed up the night before and abducted her.
But here's the dumb thing, Luke. Do you remember how he finds out she took out books too?
Oh, well, that comes up in the next scene.
Okay, so that's the thing. It's like, and it's done in voiceover. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think what it is he's just like, oh, you used to be able to just get information from the library, but they don't give it out anymore. So I know someone who is able to get me that information, and really quickly they could find out who took out a book. So I know it's Leslie, so I'll go over there. It's like just like
that's not even because he goes to Leslie's place because he remembers she had books and she's missing. So then he goes back to the office and he has Miss Emily call all the libraries who have books on tape or whatever. And one of them has books that was recently taken out for philosophy and humanities. And he's able to get them to tell them the phone number of the person who took it out. And then he calls someone he knows who can get a phone number to get you an address. And from that address, he finds out that this lady owns a summer home on a lake nearby.
I just thought it was so dumb to have this like character off screen who we don't know who it is, who does the legwork for Kolchak in an episode where we've seen Kolchak do a bunch of legwork that amounts to nothing. You know, it's like, why not have him meet this guy and have them investigate this way and show any of this?
Here's the thing. You're skipping a bunch of scenes. Like, he still goes back to the widow's house a second time where she talks about how her husband was into microcircuitry and how the lady, Mrs. Dwyer, was into like, I don't know, autonetics or something. And he's just like, oh, that sounds an awful lot like robots. Like, he does so much legwork that goes nowhere in this episode. Like, that, it's so weird. Like, it's all legwork that goes nowhere in this episode.
Exactly. Yeah.
Anyway, so yeah, they call libraries. They find out more books were taken out. They use a phone number to find out that she owns a lake house. The lake house is a mansion for some reason.
Yeah, the lake house is like, it may be the same like haunted house they've gone to like 3 times in this show because it's so huge. And you get like, Kolchak goes to the door, there's no one home, he's kind of like walking around looking. We get to see a very, like you're saying, sort of like Halloween or Friday the 13th kind of shot of this creepy putty face just looking out the window at him. So we know the robot's there. He does eventually break in. I think he breaks in, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's much like the other episodes we've seen where he goes to someone's house and breaks in the middle. Like, I think that was that Devil Dog one with the senator who had to deal with the devil. Very similar.
I forgot about that episode.
Very similar. He breaks into a mansion and wanders around.
Yeah.
And there's a moment there where you think it's going to become a serial killer stalker kind of sequence because we do see him walking around the house, and every time we turn around, like, that putty face is watching him, but Kolchak doesn't know it yet. So you think there's going to be like, but it doesn't happen. What happens is he walks into a room and finds Dr. Dwyer, and she basically explains everything. She's like, oh, you want to know what's going on with Project Ring and Mr. Ring and all these things? It's like, here's the deal, is I helped build him with that other scientist, but the military wasn't happy because we built a sentient robot that's basically a child that's just learning about morality and like ethics, but they want a murder bot because they're the military, so they're unhappy. I was let go, and this other doctor I was working with was told to basically, kill the project. Like, that's why the robot was on the table. They were going to basically turn it off forever. It has but they've also built it with a survival sense. So its fight or flight reflex was to kill this man and then go on the run.
Yeah, which is supposed to explain why its behavior is being the way it is. It's sort of, it's all self-preservation is all it is, because it just wants to finish its programming, and the way it sees to do that is to listen to philosophy books on tape.
Yeah, for whatever reason, that's the only way it can. So that's why it tracked down Dr. Dwyer. Now it's trying to help it finish its ethical and moral training. And like it's so funny. She's telling it this, and then like she's telling Kolchak this, and then Mr. Ring just like punches through a door and walks into the room.
yeah, but I like it. And she's like, it's not going to attack. And I remember, like, if I was in that situation, I'd be like, I think it will attack.
It just punched its way through a door.
People. Yeah. Anyways, and then we get to hear like Mr. Robot talk, and it's very robotic. Mr. Robot, what's it called? Mr. Ring.
Mr. Ring.
Yeah.
It does lead to one funny moment where she's like, just ask it a question. You can talk to it like a human being. And Kolchak's like, what time is it? And then Mr. Ring's like, I don't know, dude, get a watch.
Yeah, he asks the time it is. It says, why don't you just get a clock? Then he asks it pi to something degree. It does it, and he's like, I wouldn't have known if you're right anyways. Then he asks it who the father of modern psychology is. It gives this long answer about Freud, but it could other things. And then he asks him the difference between right or wrong, and that sort of stumps him. And that's to illustrate that it still hasn't had enough, like you're saying, moral and ethical training to be able to answer that question. And just then the military shows up.
Yeah, it's okay. At that moment, all the military pulls up in front of this building. They storm the building. They just shoot Mr. Ring dead.
Yeah, I thought it was going to be like a sort of classic Incredible Hulk sort of scene. You know, the military shows up, he's going to throw tanks around and stuff. But yeah, it just comes down the stairs, and she's like, "It's fine." And the military's like, "Shoot him." They shoot him like once he's dead. I'm like,
which is so funny to me because, like, half an hour before this, Mr. Ring was punching his way out of a mortuary with the cops around him, being led by a military general who was telling them not to shoot Mr. Ring. And then we come to learn that because this entire time, all they wanted to do was decommission the robot, but they wouldn't shoot him earlier in the episode. Like, they should have just, I didn't understand. I'm like, this doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, it felt like there should have been a line where they were like, now that we know, blah, 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 we can shoot him, you know?
I guess, but like, even when she explains, she's like, that guy was killed at the beginning because they were trying to decommission him. It's just like, so there was no, like, the only reason he wasn't shot earlier was to make the episode go longer.
Can you imagine if that was the line? He's like, no, don't shoot him. We have 20 minutes left.
We got a lot of time left in this episode still. And anyway, we cut back to the end of the episode where we started the episode. Kolchak's stumbling back into the INS. He's dictating this entire story into his tape recorder. Because what happened, apparently, is after they shot the robot, the military dragged him and Dr. Dwyer off and treated their brains with mind wave drugs. So he is like, he even isn't even saying, he's just like, I doubt I'll believe myself in the morning. But there's something far more nefarious that the government has drugs they can just wipe your brain with and they send you back into the world.
Again, I know it's maybe harder to fit into the formula that this show has to stick by, evidently. But isn't that more of an interesting episode? Like a bottle episode of Kolchak stuck in a place and he's getting drugged, or he's getting some sort of his brain's being altered in some ways and he has to get out, or he has to figure out what's happening, but he can't trust his own mind. There's a cool episode there, but like, that's not what this is. They're just like, oh yeah, all that cool stuff, it all happened off screen.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, even when it started and he was like confused, I was just like, oh, are we going to learn that like they've replaced Kolchak with a robot or something? You know, none of these things happen. It's just like a kind of dull ending to sadly a dull episode.
Yeah, it was kind of a dull episode. I'd agree.
Yeah, I don't know. That wraps it up. Do you have any final thoughts you want to throw into this? Any little notes we didn't get to?
I don't think so. I'm curious as to what the next culture is that we're going to be offensive about.
Yeah, they love it. They love it a lot. I think you're right. The first episode wasn't like aggressively rude to those cultures, but they also were like, there wasn't a single character, with maybe the exception of the restaurant owner, just because he didn't have that many scenes, but like, all of the Jewish characters were just represented by like the most stereotypical things you could do. They weren't like actively offensive, but they weren't like, they were just like, I don't know, what's a 70s Jewish person like? And it's just like, it's so hack.
It's a shorthand of, we know what you guys want. We know what the stereotype is. Let's just do that because it's quick and easy. That's basically what it is.
Yeah. So that, you know, which is so funny because the monster's from a completely different culture, but like the culture they're maligning is like, it's all such a weird episode all around.
Well, while we're talking about what would you give the first episode, I could even start. I'm going to give it a higher score than I think it probably warrants, partly because I was happy to come back to Kolchak. And I think overall, I liked the episode. It just didn't quite work, and I think there was a lot of that. So I'm going to give it a 6.5.
6.5, fair enough. I mean, you're not wrong. It's nice to be back with Darren McGavin as Kolchak. Like, he's a very compelling man to watch in this character. Yeah, the episode itself was just like, the othering, as always, sucked. The episode itself was weak all around. Like, it just kind of was like, kind of weak in general. Yeah. And like we said, like there's some cool ideas they never get into. I like the end with Miss Emily. There is some tension there, so it's kind of like a nice ending to it. I don't know. I'm gonna give it a 4. It's not their best outing by any means.
Yeah, it suffers from. It feels like they're starting to just tread through well-worn paths already, and they're only 11 episodes in, which wouldn't have boded very well for a long-run series. You know what I mean? Like, it just feels like, I know we know a little bit of what kind of happened, but it does feel like already they're grasping at straws. They're like, yeah, this is another sort of monster of the week, which again, I've said, I don't mind the idea of a monster of the week. I kind of think it works well for the show. It's just that you need to take interesting new angles to keep the viewers interested, and what they're falling into is a formula that's starting to feel more and more stale with every week.
Yeah, I mean, that's just it. It's just like the formula has run out of steam, so they need to either, like, I'm not saying don't do Monster of the Week, but you need to find more to do, and I think what it is like, you need to bring more characters in.
Yeah, that's one answer. And the problem, like you're saying, is this next episode, what do you call it? Mr. Ring. Him as this unstoppable force. Interesting, because as we've established, Kolchak is not a strong person. He is not someone who's going to physically fight with the person. The problem is, this is at least the third or fourth, if not fifth time we've had an unstoppable force that he can't physically overcome. It's like, well, he has done it now. So it's like, why not a villain that has to attack his intelligence or has to attack something else for Kolchak, that we see a different part of him?
I would say the thing is, too, like, it's an unstoppable force that Kolchak never interacts with until the last 2 minutes of the episode. So it's not even like it's an unstoppable force that Kolchak has to confront. He never confronts it.
Well, it's true, because that's the only thing they've come up with. It's different creative, which is, here's something that's physically imposing. You can't stop it. So we're just going to come up with a different way to beat it. We've had him stab the zombie and put salt in its mouth and accidentally get it hung. We've had him show a reflection to the bird man who steals, like, the magpie guy. We have him accidentally electrocuting the Jack the Ripper. But this one, it's like, well, we need a new way. He can't find a convenient thing to kill him. Oh, well, someone else just shoots him.
Well, Kolchak isn't... If you took Kolchak out of this episode, everything goes exactly as it goes.
You're exactly right. Yeah, it's funny to have the main character be not important to the show in any way.
It's a very silly. I don't know. I'll write this one. Mr. Ring. I liked the Mr. Ring. I liked the robot. I liked when I put on the mask. Like, it was one of the scarier things they had, like, in the corners of it, but they didn't. But because it was supposed to be like a sympathetic robot, it ended up not being helpful, because it's like you actually created something very weird and scary to look at that in the end we're just supposed to not be that afraid of. I don't know. None of this episode worked. I think this is a 2.
Yeah, I'm not going to be as harsh, but to your point, I think, again, there's an interesting episode in here. What if it's Kolchak is on the lam with this robot, and he has to sort of teach the robot stuff along the way as ways to get out of situations? I mean, sure, that's been done to death a million times in things we've seen too, but there's something more there than just this unstoppable force that he has to fight, the big boss at the end of the level. So I can only give this a 5 out of 10, which I think is probably being generous, but it is a little disappointing to come back to a show that I do like the show and I like the character, and maybe that's the problem, is I like the character, but the show is really starting to kind of wear thin, and I'm a little wary of where these episodes are going to go, because I have a feeling we're going to start saying the same things over and over and over.
See, it's starting to, honestly, coming back to it, I was excited to be back, and I watched it, I'm like, oh, right, this is where we left off, and I'm very worried about where we go from here.
Well, because, yeah, we're halfway through a series now, and there's been some
ran
bright
out of steam
spots.
like 3 episodes ago.
Yeah, it ran out of steam. And like, maybe there's going to be... Here, I'll give them this. I think getting away from monsters, for lack of a better term, or villains that we know, I think is an interesting idea. But I don't think this show is going to be able to handle them in a interesting and subtle way that explains more about us as a culture, explains more about Kolchak, creates some moral quandaries. That's not where this show is going. It's Chinese people. Do they have a weird thing? How about German people? Do they have a weird thing? That's all it really is kind of falling into now.
Yeah, it is too bad. It is too bad. Because that's the thing. I think we watch these, and even within the individual episodes, you can see like what could have been, but it's not what they tried to do.
And that's Kolchak. So we'll see what happens next week. Maybe we'll be wrong. Maybe we'll be pleasantly surprised.
Yeah, we'll find out. In the meantime, you can get a hold of us at continuumdrag@gmail.com if you want to drop us a line. And on Instagram and Twitter @continuumdrag. We're going to have some clips from these episodes. Lots of stuff with that scary robot. I'm a big fan of that robot. That's what's
He's the best part of the episode.
That robot looked cool.
Yeah, he did look cool.
And then, we'll find some stuff of the probably shooting Miss Emily with a crossbow. That'll be there.
Yeah, that is a highlight.
That wraps it up. So, listener, thank you for joining us. And Jordan, see you next week.
See you then. Continuum Drag is recorded in Toronto, Ontario. Theme music by James Rex Seidler. Produced by Jordan Dullock and Luke Black. Special thanks to Aaron Hughes.